Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, YouTube podcast show, once again powered by citiesabc.com, businessabc.net, and wisdomia.ai. And soon we will talk as well about sportsabc.org. AI is probably the most important keyword or keywords that we are talking and is affecting us all in a lot of different layers. And artificial intelligence is touching all the areas of the society, is implementing and touching deeper than ever, and is going to have an impact that is going to bring a lot of great things, but as well a lot of questions, a lot of risks, and a lot of panic. So today I'm particularly excited to welcome to the series someone that is researching artificial intelligence for decades, and of course that leads one of the biggest departments of research in the world in Microsoft. So today our special guest is Juan M. Lavista Ferres. That is a data scientist, AI specialist and researcher, and is as we speak, the corporate vice president and chief data scientist at the AI for Good lab at Microsoft. In his capacity, Juan leveraged technologies like AI, machine learning, and statistical modeling to support Microsoft's AI for Good initiative, including AI for Earth and sustainability, AI for Humanitarian Action, AI for accessibility, and AI for health. In his latest book, AI for Good, Applications in Sustainability, Juan and his co-author, William, highlights how artificial intelligence and advanced data science can be utilized to address pressing global challenges in fields such as sustainability, humanitarian action, and health. As a data scientist and researcher, Juan has been involved in projects like Microsoft Experimentation Platform and Bing Data Mining. His research on sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, has been published in international academic journals like Pediatrics and covered by major media outlets such as The Geek Wire, BBC, NPR, Fast Company, Fortune Magazine, New York Times, CNN, US Today, and more, totaling over 100 global news platforms around the world. He is also the editor of Microsoft Journal of Applied Research, MSGAR, and before his tenure at Microsoft, he was the co-founder of Alerts.com. As a leader, Juan has been applying technology for social good, for instance, while being at Inter-American Developing Bank in Washington, where he applied data science to evaluate the impact of programs aimed at reducing poverty and inequality in Latin America and the Caribbean. Juan is a PhD in AI in healthcare from Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, a master in computer science from Johns Hopkins University, an engineering and BA in information systems from University Católica del Uruguay, Damaso Antonio Lararaja. As a speaker, Juan has presented at events such as Strata, IEEE, TEDx, Cornell University, and USC Berkeley, among a lot of others around the world. It's a pleasure to have you here, Juan. I'm very excited to talk about you, about some of the most pertinent questions we are facing as humanity, and especially with your excellent research and all the areas that touch all of us in our lives.
Thank you, Dinis, for the invitation.
I think the first question I have to ask is a bit of your personal background is always something very important for me. And I would like to, on the personal background, a bit of both a bit of history, but as well someone that was important for you. And you are dealing with technology and data and as well ethics and a lot of things related to humanitarian. If there was any kind of case study that touched you for what you do right now.
Yeah, so my background is computer science. I learned coding very early in life. I had the luck that my parents bought me a very small microcomputer. Like it was a Brazilian clone of a Sinclair Spectrum that had 48 kilobytes. And I learned BASIC with that computer. And after that, I became completely enamored about the whole idea of programming and coding. I went to study computer science. I'm originally from Uruguay, South America. I grew up in a farm. And in 2001, I had a chance to move to the U.S. to work for the Inter-American Development Bank. That is a multilateral organization that works with countries around South America and the Caribbean, mainly on on development loans. As part of that job, my job, like still as a computer scientist, was developing systems. Very early on, I did what was likely my first machine learning model. That was early 2001. And that's a place where machine learning was certainly not mainstream. We wanted to predict which project of the bank had more chances of not being successful, or the reverse in many ways, which project would finish on time. I at that point, I had always liked the concept of data science, even though the whole concept, the idea of data science was not existent. There was idea of data mining and how to use data through algorithms. And then from there, I went to study. I studied a master in computer science with specific focus on what at that point was called data mining, that in many ways was a combination between data science and machine learning. And then in 2007, late 2007, beginning of 2008, I moved to Seattle to create a startup. Once I finished my master's, I wanted to, like, for me, working in the IDB, I learned a lot. I worked with economists. I learned a lot about causality from working with economists. But what I wanted to do at that point in life was to go try to do a startup. So I moved to Seattle to create a startup called alerts.com. Alerts.com was a startup that basically the idea was to try to combine all different alerts, from school alerts to gas price alerts to price alerts, and you would combine all of these alerts in one single place. We raised our first round of funding around March 2008. We were supposed to raise the second round of funding by around November 2008. Now, unfortunately, at that point, the whole market collapsed. After that, I decided to actually move to an action company. I joined Microsoft. And I joined Microsoft working. That was an organization that was funded by Ray Ozzie. It was called EXP, with Ronnie Kohavi managing it. And it was about the idea of running randomized control experiments at the scale of Microsoft to try to prove causality, like something that I have learned back in my days in working at the IDB. Computer scientists in general, we don't have a background in causality, but I have learned causality, a lot of causality, a lot of data, try to prove causality from data from my work in the IDB. And well, EXP was the group that ran majority of experiments in properties like Xbox, in MSN, in Windows. Eventually, that group was reorged into what at that point was the foundation of Bing, our search engine. So I became part of the Bing machine learning and data mining team. That was around 2010. And well, at that point, basically, I started my career in Microsoft. When Satya was our VP when I joined Bing, he was basically the VP of our search properties and the online properties. And when Satya became the CEO, there was the whole idea of creating a data science discipline. I was part of the small group of people that put together the plans for the data science discipline, Microsoft data science discipline. Microsoft, until that point, we were only hiring software developers, testers, and program managers. There was no notion of data scientists. So I became part of that group that put together the original plans for having data scientists. My group became more central to Microsoft, not just working in Bing, but working across different properties. And as part of that job, I always had dreamed to work on use AI and data science to help society. But I always thought I was going to do it once I retired from Microsoft. But we had one very good friend and colleague who had lost a child to SIDS. SIDS is sudden infant death syndrome, and is the main cause of death in children between 1 month to 1 year old in the US and in a lot of developed countries. And basically, SIDS is when your baby dies and doctors don't know why. We had this good friend and colleague at that point that lost a child to SIDS. And he was doing an amazing job raising awareness about SIDS. So through him, I started volunteering my time to help Seattle Children's Hospital doctors, researchers, to see whether we could help the research. And very early on, like in the first few meetings, even though we understood very little about SIDS or the data they had, it became like, for us, it became clear that we could help a lot, because a lot of these researchers didn't have the capacity to work with the amount of data. I have the amazing luck that we actually came across CDC has this amazing data set. It's an open data set that has every single child that was born in the US and a 1 year cohort of these children. And through that data set, we were able to show and try to see whether we could predict or find things that could increase the probability of having a child dying of SIDS. And well, we started working as volunteers, but eventually we presented to Sati and to Brad. And through that conversation, that was kind of the foundation of starting this group. We had the opportunity to start working on this, on using AI for helping society as a full-time job. That was my dream, and that's basically how we created the whole concept of AI for Good Lab. In the meantime, and through the research, I was a computer scientist that became a researcher. That is usually the opposite in many ways, but I was a computer scientist, I was a software developer that started liking a lot about working with research. And through that, I started a PhD in AI with a focus in healthcare. Well, the rest is what I'm doing now.
That's a very impressive career. Congratulations. I love Uruguay. I think he's actually the first person I have in the podcast from Uruguay. I need to remind my friends there. But it's really amazing. And as well, during your career, you see as well the progression as an entrepreneur, as a software developer, and as a technologist, and as a researcher. So before we deep dive in all your achievements and as well what you do right now, so one of the things I still want to touch, because you're dealing with research, and of course at the moment your lab and what became it's the AI for Good lab at Microsoft. Of course, let's touch this because it's so big thing, and I know that you have limited time. I would like to talk, what is the AI for Good lab? How did you create it? I think part of your experience gave reason to this. But of course, during that tenure as well, AI became mainstream and now is more important than ever. And of course, Microsoft is leading AI worldwide with a partnership with OpenAI. So I would like to hear a bit of the inception for this and what you guys are doing.
Once we had that idea of creating the lab, the plan was any big organization in the world has a social responsibility to contribute back to society. And I would say majority of the big organizations do a very good job doing that. But in the particular case of using technology, particularly using AI to help society, first we realized that we could make a big impact. But more important, through our experience working with these researchers in other organizations, we also realized that there's a huge gap. Is that majority of the organizations in the world that are working to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, whether it's infant mortality or working on disabilities or working in sustainability, majority of these organizations that we partner with, they don't have the structure or capacity. Right now, in the future, hopefully they will have. But right now, there is a gap where big majority of the AI and data scientists work either in the tech sector or financial industry. So unfortunately, there is a gap in society from that perspective. And I always tell the story that it's something that kind of inspired me. Jeffrey Hammerbacher, who was at that point was the person that put together the original Facebook data science team, very bright individual, and once he said, the best minds of my generation are thinking how to get people click on ads, and it's true, and it's true, was true then and still true today. And I wasn't working in ads when I heard that quote, but I was working in Bing, which by the way, search engines provide an amazing value to society. So, but part of the job was also still trying to understand, not necessarily how many people click on ads, to make sure that people click on ads, but understanding the ads as consumers. So it was a particularly call to action to me, and I certainly wanted to see how we could help. But long story short, even though making sure that people click on your ads, and the problem of understanding which families have higher chances of having a child dying of SIDS, even if these two problems cannot be further apart from a societal point of view, from a pure AI and data science perspective, these problems are basically the same problem. A lot of these problems, whether you're looking for a house that was destroyed and wanted to understand how many houses were destroyed because of an earthquake, or you're looking for particular areas of cancer in a CT scan, a lot of these problems underneath, they're just data. Of course, you need to work with some other experts that understand the data, but from a data science and AI perspective, these problems are extremely similar. So that, as part of that, I think from a return of investment, of the impact of that social responsibility, it made more sense for us, instead of donating capital or donating money to some of these organizations, we would donate our skills. We would donate our time. And the rationale there is because these organizations do not have the structural capacity to hire the people that a company like Microsoft could hire. It made more sense. And that was the whole foundation of the team. And we think today, like looking back 5 years, it was certainly the right decision. We think that the type of return of investment from a societal point of view is bigger if you donate your skills, if you can help organizations and teach organizations. Part of what we do not only is to do and work with them to try to solve the problems, but we try our best to do a knowledge transfer so they become self-sustainable. So that's basically how we envision the team. And well, when we started, what we wanted to do was try to look for the right partners, the right organizations, and the right researchers that could work with us to help them solve some of the more greater challenges.
Yeah, it's amazing, and congratulations, because this is more important than ever. Actually, probably when you started, you knew already the urgency, but now it's even more urgent. So, in your capacity as the vice president and chief data scientist on the AI for Good lab, you've been focused on 4 areas that I see. Probably, if you try to summarize, so AI for Earth, AI for Humanitarian Action, AI for accessibility, and AI for health. And part of one of the things that is quite interesting that you guys are doing in terms of, I just want to highlight this for our audience, but it's quite important that we put the links to your own website and sub-websites, is that 33 million people are affected by food insecurity, and this is some of the challenges you're facing and working. 50% decline in the planet's wildlife since 1970, and 1.3 billion people in 1 in 6 in the US live with a disability. You touch that. And 50% of people globally have access to essential health services, only 50%. So when you touch in these 4 areas, I'll repeat, just AI for Earth, AI for Humanitarian Action, AI for accessibility, AI for health. And of course, you are in a company that is the biggest company on the planet, or between the 2 biggest. How do you leverage the work and the research and within these 4 areas?
So we work, these are 4 areas that we realize that were the kind of the foundation of, in many ways, the foundation of the planet, and areas where we could also help. In the case of Earth, or we call it now sustainability, these are projects where you could go from, for example, we work on projects right now in collaboration with organizations in Colombia, working to try to understand and measure, not only measure deforestation, but also detect illegal deforestation in the Amazon. In the case of disabilities, we believe, particularly in the last wave of vision models, of large language models, but with a component of vision. Like you said, we have 1.3 billion people 1.3 billion people in the world with a disability. You also have almost 300 million people that are blind or visually impaired. Now, thanks to AI models like vision models, if you have a smartphone, they have the possibility to navigate the world through these vision models in a way that they couldn't do before. And there are organizations, for example, Be My Eyes is one of those organizations. We have internal apps in Microsoft that, like Seeing AI, that is one of our internal partners, where they have dedicated their development efforts to help people with disabilities to use AI to make sure that they could navigate the world. And I always say that for people that don't understand the value of AI, they should one day sit with people that are using these apps, because for them it's a game changer. In the case of health and healthcare, like you mentioned, we live in a world where 50% of the world do not have access to healthcare. That's also a place where we learn that there are problems that AI is not just a solution, but it's the only solution. Diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of blindness in the world. you have over 450 million people that suffer from diabetes. And we only expect this number to continue going up. Just the change in dietary across the world will increase. We expect, doctors expect that the amount of people who will suffer from diabetes will increase. But you only have 200,000 ophthalmologists. And it's not easy for us to forecast that number will significantly increase. And you need to screen the people that suffer from diabetes to understand whether they are developing diabetic retinopathy or not. Roughly 1/3 of people of those 450 million will develop diabetic retinopathy, and if they are not treated, a significant portion of those will become blind. So it's extremely important to do that screening. And we show very early on, and we work with organizations like IRIS here in the US, where you can build AI models that can help screen these patients with certainly the same level of accuracy as a very good ophthalmologist. Like I said before, even if you perfectly distribute these to other ophthalmologists around the world, it will be physically impossible to diagnose the disease. So this is a case where you need AI to help fill that gap and make sure that these ophthalmologists can focus on what they're doing the best, like their surgeries, they're treating other diseases. But certainly, we believe that for things like diabetic retinopathy, in order for us to reduce the amount of people that will become blind, we need to use AI as a society. We need to use AI to help on the screening for these patients. That's the areas in healthcare and health. We work a lot in medical imaging. We think that there's a lot of value in medical imaging on using AI on top of medical imaging. And we're just scratching the surface. We think we can do much more. In the case of humanitarian action, we have worked a lot, particularly in the area of disaster response. Whenever there is a big natural disaster, we work in partnership with Planet Labs, which is a satellite data company, and we work with them because as soon as there is a big natural disaster, they task satellites, they put them on top of the natural disaster, they take pictures, and we use AI models on top of those pictures to build the maps that are used by organizations on the ground, whether it's American Red Cross or UNHCR or any organization that is working on the ground, to have the maps, because these maps are used by these organizations to help them do their job, make sure that they prioritize, make sure they understand the logistics, make sure they deploy enough people to help the people affected on the ground. So, again, we work on other organizations, but these are roughly the four areas that we work.
These are the biggest problems of humanity, but there's a big challenge how we take this and how we manage, like I said, all the paradoxes that we have, because we have, in one end, a lot of challenge with digital literacy, a lot of challenge with, as well, finance inclusion and a lot of different parts. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is that you are as well the editor of Microsoft Journal of Applied Research, and you have access to a lot of data and a lot of information. So when you apply, and for people listening to us, of course, from the big picture to the details of how you apply this, so this research that you are applying and all this integration with, of course, the most powerful LLMs in the world with OpenAI integration and Copilot and Bing, because, of course, you have multiple different sources of data. Do you think some of these biggest problems that we're talking, can we tackle in the right way? And I will make the question a bit more complex, but I have to ask. And can we make a balance between the social economical part and the technology innovation? Because I think the challenge is how we integrate artificial intelligence within our own humanity, and then the social economical parts, because that's the challenge that we are facing, probably increasing as AI becomes more and more advanced, and in some cases AGI.
Digital literacy certainly is an area that we've been working. We actually have been working now in a collaboration with a few researchers on try to measure it, particularly related to the US, but that's a place where clearly digital literacy is important for us. When we think about large language models, the areas that I think are interesting is that we see large language models as a way to, in one way, help that digital divide, and I'm going to explain why. But at the same point, there's also a risk to exacerbate it. So you can actually help it and exacerbate it at the same time, and I'm going to explain why. On one hand, big majority of the world, 99.95% of the world, do not know how to code, correct? So a very small portion of people in the world know how to code. Even though we have been, as a society, we've been trying to help people make sure that they learn coding. That number is extremely small. And it hasn't changed dramatically in the last 20 years. And we see coding as a way, not just like coding in the 90s used to be something that mainly for computer scientists should focus. But when we're working, like I said, when I'm working with medical doctors, I'm working with sustainability researchers, we're working with architects, every single one of the disciplines can leverage coding to do their jobs better. But because the amount of people that know how to code is very small, there is that digital divide gap that affects society in general. One of the things that we see with large language models, because learning how to code in many ways is learning a new language. And what we see with large language models is for the first time, people have the ability to code in their own native language. Whether it's English, Spanish, or Mandarin, you can use a large language model to convert your language, another language, into coding. So in many ways, you are coding through your language. It has a huge potential for helping bridge that digital divide. Well, certainly our interactions with AI, our interactions with a computer became much easier, correct? Before, like if you had asked me 10 years ago, whether I ever envisioned hundreds of millions of people interacting with AI to do part of their job, I would say like I say it's going to be possible, correct? But through large language models, now we have an amazing interface where we have more than 100 million users today in the world that are interacting with AI and using AI, and their level of communication is their language. That has a huge potential to bridge that gap, correct? So that's on one side, we think the entry layer for between that human and computer interaction and the ability for humans to code in many ways, that has been a complete revolution that will help a lot of people become more productive through this technology. So on one hand, we see huge potential and huge value. At the same time, we also see that this technology has an immense amount of power. So similar to what happened with people that had access to computers or the internet and people that didn't have, we do think and we worry about that a new level of digital divide. So on one hand, those that have access to this technology, I think that will be completely benefit, and that digital divide, like that divide gap will be significantly reduced. At the same time, if you don't have access to this technology, because either you don't have access to electricity or you don't have access to computers, you don't have access to the internet, certainly that divide will be higher. But we see both areas.
Yeah, I want to touch more on this, but I want to go to your book because this is a key element. And I think your book, and so for people listening to us, you are the co-author of the book, AI for Good. And it's a very powerful book that touches, well, a lot of the things we're discussing here, but a very positive book and a very down-to-earth in terms of case studies and different parts. So for people listening to us, and of course we'll put all the information. So the AI for Good applications in sustainability, humanitarian action, and health, that was published by Wiley, and this with the co-author of William B. Weeks and the forward of Brad Smith. So let's touch the book. You wrote this book and you touch all these different things. There are this very, very detailed, very calls to action, but I would like to, there's a lot of questions. First of all, listen for you, the book purpose, and a bit for people that don't know. And I recommend everyone to buy it and engage, because it's as well, the returns of the book will go to charity and for Red Cross, but it's a very important book for what to do, all of us in society.
Yeah, we started the book a little over a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, with the vision that whenever we were working with organizations around the world, one of the most difficult aspects was to show them what they could do with AI. It wasn't obvious because they didn't know what they could do. Like, we would partner with them, we would have meetings with them, and it became one of the things that became really easy for us to show the power was to show them examples on how we were using AI in other fields, right? Whether it was computer vision for medical imaging or satellite data or acoustic data, we would showcase what was, and it was difficult for us to explain what they could do with AI, but it was really easy for us to explain what solve other problems. And through those conversations with these partners, it became like a tool for us to help them have an impact was showcasing what they could do with AI. And that was basically the whole idea. Was like, we need to write the book to have these examples in a way that we could distribute them easily. So the target audience for that book, when we thought about the book, was the people that we typically work with. These researchers that are not necessarily in the AI space, that are working in other space, but they are trying to use technology to help solve their problems. And our objective was, let's have all these examples in a way that is easy for them to show, for us to show them the power of AI and technology. That basically, that started the idea. Like you mentioned, I partnered with Bill Weeks on my team, and then we work not just us, but every researcher in my organization, our partners, to write down all the chapters. That every chapter, the book has 29, I think, different examples of how we're using AI to help solve these work challenges in all of these areas, like you mentioned before, from accessibility to health to sustainability to humanitarian action. You have examples of all of these.
Of course, the book is extremely positive, but of course, when you talk about AI, I think even in my case, I have days where I get probably very anxious, to say less, and other days that I get very bold. But there's a great quote from Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft, and as well the Ford. So AI offers more potential for good of humanity than any invention that preceded. After reading the book, I hope you'll share my optimism for the possibilities of this powerful new technology. So you guys are dealing with this, and for instance, there's even some, of course, at the moment we are in a stage where we are getting into AGI, and whatever we define AGI is another question that would probably take a couple of podcasts. But in terms of the optimism is big, and I love that you are very practical in the uses that can come out of that. So what I would touch right now, and of course we'll put more information about the book in the context, is from your research, and of course we talk about the digital divide. The digital divide, there's an element of digital divide from pure digital accessibility. But as, like I said, there's very small people that can code, and most of the coding is going to be replaced by AI. But we are talking about a shift that is probably the biggest in the history of humanity. And this shift will touch, in one end, the integrity that we are as humans and the integrity that we have as society. But as well, one element that I know that some of researchers in Microsoft have been highlighting is that these AIs are right now becoming inceptional digital sentience. So I would say on these cases of the positive parts of AI that we mentioned, how do you see all the negatives and how you put these two things working together, and especially how you get prepared for this?
So a few things. The first one is I like you mentioned, I try to stay away from AGI discussion for a good reason. Like you mentioned, there's not very clear definition. For me, AI and in many ways computer science or software development are all part of tools that we as a society, we decide to use to help solve problems, correct? And this is not just on my space, but in general, we as humans, we live in this planet and we're using these tools to help society and like it's just part of technology in many ways. So from that perspective, is if you ask me, it's not different to what we have been doing for centuries now of creating new tools to help us, correct? And so that for me is I see AI as a tool. Like for me, AI is a tool. The reason I try to stay away from AGI discussions is first because there's not very clear definition of AGI, but I don't think also it's productive or in general, like for us, is let's have tools that can help us solve problems. Like that's a much easier definition of how we're using technology. That I would start with that. As Brad mentioned in his book, and Brad mentioned also in a lot of his talks, any technology, correct? This is not uniquely to AI. Anything in the history of humanity, all these technologies that have a huge potential also have been, sometimes it can be used as a tool and can be used as a weapon, correct? And that's something that we as a society need to pay a lot of attention, because we collectively need to make sure that we maximize the possibility for using these tools, this technology as a tool, and reduce the chances that it can be used as a weapon. The chance of using this technology for bad purposes is never going to be zero, correct? Like no matter how much you can you can work, there will be always people that will find ways to use them for wrong purposes. And we have seen this already in the case of generative AI, where people are using generative AI sometimes for scamming people through cloning voices, to creating deepfakes. And that's an area that we also work. Like my team has been working now for the last year on using AI technology to help detect some of the deepfakes. I'll try to better understand the problems, try to better educate the public about these problems. I'm optimistic. I see the risk for this technology, but I also, when we look at the history of humanity, we something that is common is that society works together to make sure that at the end we are using and we are setting the right foundations for maximizing the use tools and to improve as a society. So I'm optimistic that society collectively usually makes the right decisions on these technologies. And that I don't think that's going to be different here. Of course, it doesn't mean that we need to understand the risk. We need to help mitigate the risk. We need to work collectively, not just private sector. This is private sector, public sector, NGOs working together to make sure that we reduce the chances of these technologies to be used as a weapon. And that's why for us, and this is something that didn't start 2 years ago with the whole inception of GPT, started much earlier, the whole idea of responsible AI and having a responsible AI framework, because we saw very early that there are risks, and we need to make sure that people understood this risk and make sure that we mitigate as much as possible. We mitigate these risks.
I love your direct points, and as well, I think that's a discussion that is really necessary, because definitely there's a lot of risks, and of course they are happening in multiple ways. I want to continue here and go, because I know that we have limited time. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, said recently that AI should not be called artificial intelligence, but rather a different intelligence. And mostly the suggestion, and quoting again, that the intelligence distinct from human intelligence, yes, stated that we should call it different intelligence because I have my intelligence, I don't need any artificial intelligence. So I know this was like the context of a lot of issues related with subultimate and different parts, but I want to touch this part in particular, because what you're saying is the tool, the component of the tool. But for instance, I interviewed as well recently another of the biggest researchers in AI, and one of the things that I've been finding is there's definitely, even if it's a tool right now, is a tool that can actually lead for itself. And Nick Bolton, which is probably as well a former Oxford researcher, he mentioned the idea of the digital sentient, and his new book touched that. So when in your book you look at the tool capacities and very concrete things, because you guys are working in some of the biggest organizations in the world. So I would like to look at your research components and the idea of the tool, and I will look at the research, the tool, the impact, but as well how this tool is a tool that starts having an action of its own, especially with AI agents and everything that is happening. So how do you look at this and this different intelligence?
So we need to understand that no matter how sophisticated these AI models are, whether you're using like a trillion parameter large language model, at the end of the day underneath, we're just talking about math, right? Like this is just multiplication of matrices, and that's something that when people think about AI, sometimes people forget that there is no, and that's why, I don't believe in the whole idea of sentient or things like that. We need to understand that particularly large language models, that is the one that when you interact with a large language model, people these models have an amazing power and have people are really relatively easy being confused about that part of the intelligence, because they are answering questions in an amazing way. They have amazing power. But underneath, what these models are trying to do is just trying to predict the next word. That's the only thing a large language model is doing, is given a context, try to predict what is the next word that I need to say. Large language models are not saying, they don't understand necessarily the world. They are learning from a huge corpus of data. That is a lot of the content in the open web. That is where big majority of human knowledge as a civilization, that's our most important open data set is the open web. These large language models have the ability to learn from all of these. Through that, trying to break the next word, they need to learn a representation of the world, and that representation of the world is the one that gives a huge amount of power in the ability to answer these questions. So I'm not arguing they don't have the power, but at the same time, it's very important to understand like what they're doing and what they're not doing, correct? And while yes, when you interact with one of these large language models, a lot of the dialogues could be dialogues that you could have with a human. You need to understand the reason why they behave like humans in many ways is because they are trained in human dialogues and in human data. But they're not, they're certainly not humans, certainly not sentients. And yes, you could have agents and you could like code agents in a way that these agents, you are embedding your decisions in these agents. But that doesn't mean like, it doesn't mean that we have as a society anything different to what we had before. Like right now, what we have is a great tool, but still a tool. So I'm not worried about that. I think it's part of human nature to be concerned about the wrong uses of this technology. I think that's part of how we work, and I think that can help us understand and mitigate those risks. But I'm not worried about that aspect.
It's quite interesting how you look at this in a very practical way, because effectively there's a lot of discussions quite alarming, and probably most of the research there's a division between people that are very alarmed. But I like and focus here, and the sense of time, I like this very pragmatic approach. So one of the things that the book and your work has been highlighting, and I love about that, is the fact of all the concept of AI for humanitarian action, and especially the relationship of this can become and bring new solutions for organizations, the social impact and social potential, policymakers, regulators, NGO professionals, and non-profit volunteers. So let's touch this, because I think it's something that is not being used and not discussed enough. And I think that's the special about your book. If you can elaborate practical stuff, and of course we'll put some quotes during this to highlight.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, one of the main use cases for us has been whenever there is a natural disaster, we know through changes in climate that we expect an increase in these type of problems that mainly affect people in certain regions. Not everybody in the world is equally affected by these disasters, but particularly the people that are more affected usually are either in the global south or people living in areas, people living in areas that are highly likely more affected by these natural disasters. We work with a lot of organizations, whether it's American Red Cross or UNHCR or other UN agencies. And what we are trying to do is help those organizations that are working on the ground to help them be more effective, be more productive. And one of early on when we started working, where we realized there was a common problem across all of these organizations, that is, as soon as you have a natural disaster that is affecting an area, we need to understand what happened. We need to understand where was the disaster, how big was the disaster, and who was affected by the disaster. And high resolution satellite data provides an amazing tool for that, because it helps them understand the issue. The challenge is that if the area is big, try to map it and try to have humans looking at every building and understand where are these buildings, where was they're affected, could take days, sometimes weeks. That is not, they don't have that time, correct? So whenever there is a natural disaster, you have a very small window of time where you need to deploy people on the ground and you need to help people that were affected. But you cannot wait 2 weeks to get these. And AI models working on top of satellite data have the capacity to help us map these areas. And these maps can be used and are being used by organizations on the ground to make these decisions. So that's a big area for us of investment. Another big area, this is something that we've been working very closely with the University of Washington, the Institute of Health Metrics and Planet Labs, is that in order for us to help people either be better prepared or after or as a disaster preparedness or disaster response, you first need to understand where do people live. And if you live in the US, if you live in the global north in general, your maps are usually up to date. You know where people live in a country. But this is not the case in a lot of countries in the global south, particularly affecting the sub-Saharan Africa, where a lot of these maps can be 10, 15 years old. And in 15 years, some countries in sub-Saharan Africa have doubled their population. They have, which means that half of the population of some areas of the country, some cities, particularly rural areas, are not up to date. If you don't know where people live, you cannot help them. You cannot understand logistics. You cannot understand disaster preparedness. You cannot do disaster response. In one of the earthquakes that we worked, was the last earthquake in Afghanistan in 2023. A significant portion of the people that were affected by the earthquake were not in any map. So one of the works that we've been doing is a collaboration with these organizations, but also UN agencies on what they call the early warning for all, is to create this foundation that is an up-to-date map of the population distribution across the entire world. And that for us is one of our most important projects, and an area where we think if we get this foundation right, we can help not just these organizations, but many other organizations around the world. So that has been a focus for us.
So from this work, and this is a very important part, so there's the work and the mapping and the data that is available to public and for everyone. One thing that is for me, particularly important, and there's a question, probably the last one, according to the time, how can the organizations engage? Because you're working with some of the biggest organizations in the world and governments and institutions. And one of the challenges that they're struggling to understand the tools, or the velocity of the tools and disruption come out of it. So a bit of steps how you deal, both being, of course, in one of the biggest corporations in the planet, but as well in the practicality of bringing these tools, these AI tools for humanitarian, down to these institutions and organizations and to anyone listening to us.
So we partner with, if there are, we typically focus on big natural, we focus on some of the world's greatest challenges. Some of the organizations reach out to us. We sometimes reach out to these organizations. Sometimes we do open calls. But through all of these ways, we try to get an understanding on what are the problems that these organizations have. We try to look for problems where not just one organization has that particular problem, but multiple organizations, and try to optimize. And not all problems can be solved using AI and technology. So we try to look for these. On the quadrant are problems that are where technology can have an impact and we can solve these problems. We have the expertise. And on top of that, we partner with organizations that if we can be successful solving these problems, we can eventually do the knowledge transfer to each organization, and this organization can use this technology. So that has been our main focus.
So one of the last questions. So in terms of the work you've been doing so far, in of course in the website and the research, you have a lot of case studies. So what would be you mentioned as well already one or two cases. From all this research that you're doing, what would be the most impact that you felt that you did already? And one case study besides what you mentioned so far, or another one?
I think it's difficult. Like every project is different. Sometimes it's different. Difficult to compare some of these projects. Of course, areas like the disaster response is an area that it's relatively easy for us to see the impact, because you see organizations using your data. But we've been working in other areas like health and healthcare. We're working in areas like pancreatic cancer, for example, try to do early detection of pancreatic cancer. We're working to try to help reduce the deforestation in the Amazon, help understand and measure biodiversity. Every project is different, and in many ways, every project is difficult to have one favorite project, or one that you could think is more impactful. But because these areas are so different in many ways.
Well, the last one I want to touch is so Brad Smith, and you touched that about the deepfakes and the different parts. I know that one of the things you're working right now is precisely about combating deepfakes, which is probably one of the shortcuts that is really creating a lot of damage. Recently, Brad Smith mentioned about the founder of True Media and the work that has been done, I think, with you guys in terms of combating and using good AI to combat that. Can you touch about some work on this?
Yeah, so we work with True Media, with Gianni, he's a great researcher, and with other organizations. We are trying to, on one side, we are helping on the research side, try to come up with algorithms to understand how we can reduce, how can we improve the detection of deepfakes. We also work in areas like provenance to better understand how technology can help trust content. And at the same time, a big area, this is something that we have collaborated with True Media and other organizations, is to help educate the world, the people in the world, that these type of products exist. And one thing that we did, we just released, we released a game that is called Real or Not, the Real or Not quiz, where we use generative AI and real images, and the people need to decide which one is real and which is fake. And the whole objective of this game is to help people understand that this technology is quite good and it's no longer easy to differentiate between a real image and an image generated by AI. And it will only get more difficult. So that's something that is important for people to understand, that this is possible. Not only possible, but it's relatively easy for people to do this, and that some of these images can be used for deceptive purposes.
Last one. So AI for good is a key element that everyone has to focus on. Your book is a great must-read resource for technical and non-technical professional interested in all the things that we discussed today. So what would be the message for startups, young people listening to us when it comes to AI and all the things that come to these tools coming out of AI?
I think we can do much more with this technology. I think that this is just the beginning of how we can use this technology for good. And I think that we will see many more examples. I think that if you ask me, it's very important for people to understand that AI is not new. It has been used in production for over 3 decades. People use AI every day. They've been using AI. A lot of people use AI every day for the last at least 2 decades. Whether they're using a search engine or they're looking at asking for an Uber, behind the scenes, there's a lot of algorithms that are being used. And that, I think, is going to help society understand that people should not be necessarily afraid of the technology. And I'm not saying that this should not be used as people should still be concerned. I think it's important that collectively we work as a society to reduce the chances that this technology can be used for the wrong purposes or as a weapon. But there's, I fully agree with what Brad mentioned in the forward. This technology has a huge potential for good and for solving many more problems. We look forward for trying to help and finding ways we can help society.
Well, thank you so much. I know that you have to leave, so it's been an honor. There's a lot of more questions, but we're going to put actually a special about the book. And for people listening to us, definitely what I love is that there's very practical things that probably people are more focused on the negative than actually acting on that. And that's, I think, part of your conclusion here. Act on it. Thank you. It's been an honor, Juan. And I think this work is more important than ever for all of us. So
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much for the time.
Gracias.